Why do we have such a hard time with losing weight, but more so keeping it off? Because of obese people, 6 out of every 7 obese people will lose a significant amount of body weight in their life. So why do we still have an obesity problem? They don't keep it off. Why don't they keep it off? When you look at the research, basically what it suggests is because people think about, I'm going to do a diet and I'm going to lose this weight, and they do not give any thought to what happens afterwards, right? It's like, think about if you have some kind of chronic disease or a diabetic, right? You can't just take insulin once and that's it, right? You got to take it continuously. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. If you do a diet and you lose 30 pounds, fantastic. But if you then just go back to all your old habits, you're going to go back to where you were, if not more. You can't create a new version of yourself while dragging your old habits and behaviors behind you. So what I'll tell people is, because people say, well, I'm doing a carnivore diet, or I'm doing this diet or that diet. And I'll say, that's fine. Do you see yourself doing that for the rest of your life? And if the answer is yes, if you really believe that that's going to be sustainable for you, and plenty of people, low carb, intermittent fasting, whatever, they say, felt easy. I could do this forever. Great. If you're going to lose weight, you have to invoke some form of restriction, whether it is a nutrient restriction, like low carb, low fat, a time restriction, intermittent fasting, any form of time restricted eating, or calorie restriction, tracking macros, whatever. So you get to pick the form of restriction. So pick the form of restriction that feels the least restrictive to you as an individual, and also do not assume that it will feel the same for everybody else, because I made this mistake where it's like, I track things. And so I allow myself to eat a variety of foods. I allow myself to eat some fun foods, but I track everything, and I'm able to modify my body composition and be in good health doing that. Now, it doesn't feel hard for me. Part of it's I've just been doing it for so long. But to other people, that's very stressful. They don't want to. They say, well, I'd rather just not eat for 16 hours. If that feels easy for them, do that. Because the one thing that there was a couple of meta-analysis on popular diets, and basically what they showed was they were all equally terrible for long-term weight loss. But when they stratified them by adherence, and none of them were better for adherence overall, but when they stratified people just according from lowest adherence to best adherence, it was a linear effect on weight loss. So really what it says is, what is the diet that's going to be easiest for you to adhere to in the long term? And you should probably do that. And people, again, this is where I step back and take the 10,000 foot view. Somebody will say, well, I'm going to do ketogenic because I want to increase my fat oxidation and I want to do this. And they're talking about all these mechanisms and everything. And that's great. Can you do it for the rest of your life, right? Is this going to be something sustainable for you? And if the answer is no, you probably need to rethink what your approach is going to be.
It's incredibly important message. Basically that, if I could highlight, if there was a version of highlighter, boldface, and underline in the podcast space, I would highlight, boldface, and underline what you just said. And for those of you that heard it, listen to it twice and then go forward, because it's absolutely key. I think it also explains a lot of the so-called controversy that exists out there. I think it also crosses over with the placebo effect. I almost want to say, pick the nutrition plan that you think you can stick to for a long period of time, ideally forever, and pick your placebo too, because there is a lot of placebo woven into each and every one of these things. Intermittent fasting, keto, probably even vegan versus omnivore versus carnivore.
Well, they even talk about the diet honeymoon period, right? Where like you go into a diet and you're all fired up about it and like you're very adherent, and then what happens with every single diet, without exception in research studies, is once you get past a few months, adherence just starts waning and going off.
Here we are really talking about a form of relationship. I'm not saying that to be tongue in cheek. Actually, we had a guest early on in the podcast, Dr. Carl Deisroth. He's a psychiatrist and bioengineer at Stanford, tremendously successful Lasker Award winner, et cetera. And he talked about love as a sort of an interesting aspect of our psychology, where it's a story that you co-create with somebody, but that you live into the future of that story. When you pair up with somebody, that we was referring to romantic love, that there's this sort of mutual agreement to create this this idea that you're going to live into. So it's not just about how you feel in the moment, it's also that you project into the future quite a lot. I'm seeing a lot of parallels with a highly functional and effective diet. And I love it. I'm not setting this parallel up artificially. I'm setting up because I think that ultimately it boils down to what you said earlier, which is that the brain and our decisions about what we are going to stick to are tremendously powerful.
And I think one thing I will say is, like, keep in mind, when you look at the research data, the meta-analyses on, say, time-restricted eating versus non, when calories are equated, doesn't seem to be a difference in weight loss, fat loss, and most biomarkers of health. Same thing for low carb versus low fat. If you equate calories and protein, there was a meta-analysis done by Kevin Hall back in 2017, where they looked at actual loss of body fat. And another important point was I think there was 22 studies in this, but all of them provided food to the participants, right? That's important because that ensures that adherence is going to be much higher in those studies, whereas like various free living studies, sometimes you can see funky results.
People are sneaking food or they're just not really
it's very
eating
difficult.
The way that the study would ideally have them
unless the person is getting like continuous support, like studies where they have a dietitian talk to people like every week tend to actually have pretty good adherence. But I mean, that's expensive to have done a study. And again, like what limits studies? Money, and money, right? But the low carb versus low fat, when protein and calories are equated, basically no difference in fat loss. Now, some people get upset about this, but it's like, well, to me, that's like, this is great because you get to pick the tool you want. The one tool, it doesn't seem to be that much better than another. So pick the one that works for you, right? Whatever lever you've got to pull, you've got a bunch of different options.